Hi, everyone. So, I want to take a little bit of time to talk about what we're doing within your teacher projects and what exactly the point of action research is within the context of the program and your work as teachers. The teaching project is an action research project, and as much as it's something that you're ultimately submitting at the end of the summer term, it's something that we're going to start now in an attempt to capture questions and conduct some authentic research that actually informs your practice now, and that looks at the real questions that are emerging from where you are, from your portfolio entries and other things that we take a look at. So, research is always a process of discovering some questions, right? And gathering data and analyzing that data in order to answer questions. Um, Teacher research is something specific, right? It's initiated and carried out by teachers in classrooms and schools. And teacher researchers use their questions to look at everything from the best way to teach reading within a particular class to the most useful methods for organizing, let's say, group activities, to even thinking about the different ways that girls or boys might respond to aspects of your curriculum. There's a range of possibilities in terms of what you might look at, but it's all really rooted in story and anchored in story. Um, I think that most teacher research is really dominated by qualitative inquiry. And what that means is we're not looking at numbers and we're not looking at test scores per se. We're rooted in thinking about narrative and narratives from classrooms. Um, I think that that's part of the reason that I chose this particular slide and this particular picture. I think that stories are usually good mirrors of our practice and windows on the practice of others. And in this particular kind of research, stories are a pretty critical tool for looking at the deeper theories or the rules that might be governing the ways in which your classroom works, right? So, as a teacher, I'm going to be really honest with you. It's really easy to see research as maybe work, right? The thing that you might consider after you deal with all the really pressing needs of your classroom. Um, but there are ways to be thinking about your inquiry skills that I really think are relevant to every teacher and every classroom. The process that we go through in thinking about this as research is really similar to the exact same process that you're going to go through every single time that you think through what works and what doesn't work in your pedagogy. You're formalizing it a little bit more with this, right? I think that if you think deeply about your classrooms, you're asking a question just about each day, right? Each period, each moment. It's very much a part of what we do as teachers. However, a research question looks a little bit different. And that's our main goal for today is thinking a great deal about the beginnings of your research question. Um, I want you to be thinking about that research frame of mind as a way of pretty much anchoring yourself inside of your teaching context, right? So, a good research question typically emerges from the musings, the wonderings, the things that we think about on a day-to-day basis, but the things that also help us to stay rooted in the scholars who we're becoming. And I think that's something that we'll talk about a little bit more as we keep thinking about what action research is and how it's going to matter to your teaching, right? Action researchers are focused on change. And that's why it's interchangeable to use the terms action research or to use the term teacher research, right? Your goal is to reflect on your practices, right? To think a great deal about what's happening inside of your classroom spaces, to use some data to inform what you're doing, and to continually kind of go through this cycle that examines the impact of the changes that you might make. So if I'm going to put it into a bit of a framework for you, it's an iterative process, right? And typically the kinds of research that I do as a qualitative researcher, they follow a lot of these same paths. But what's different is that last column that's labeled action. So a researcher always starts by posing a question, initiating a study, looking at the literature, and starting to say, what is it that we know about this topic? And what is it that my work might contribute, right? We do some data gathering, and then once we have that data, we make sense out of it. We're going to spend a lot of time in the summer talking about data analysis, right? Our work in the spring on this project is all about research design and gathering your data. That's it. What you do with the data once you have it, the coding, the analysis, that's going to come in the spring. Or what am I saying? That's going to come in summer one, as is the actual writing up of what you've done, that communication. And for us, that's going to come in the form of a pretty formal paper. I'm attaching to the email tonight a rubric so you have a sense of what the paper is, a format guideline that's going to let you know what the structure of the paper is. That's just for reference at this point. It's not meant to overwhelm, but it lets you to kind of have a sense of what you're heading toward. What makes action research different is that it also impacts practice immediately, right? So you're taking your findings and you're moving them into action and doing something with them. And in doing so, that should open up other questions. So when I talked about this being cyclical, the questions that are opened at the end of any particular action research study tend to push you back into then thinking about new questions, new ways of gathering data, new ways of exploring what's happening inside of your classroom. This is a really important process to be able to talk about, I think, with prospective principals as well. We're in an age where it's really important to be talking about ways that we use data to inform practice. And working with SOL data, working with Common Core data, working with any type of outcome, PSSA data, any kind of data that you have, that's useful. But this actually shows that you're a thinking teacher. You're a teacher who's posing questions about their practice and trying to actually use what you're able to learn in dialogue with the professional literature to impact your teaching in meaningful ways. I think it goes a little bit further. So it's something to consider in that. Your study is going to follow a couple of really key steps, right? We're going to design your research questions. We're going to plan your data collection. Then we're going to go through the process of collecting that data, doing a little bit of a literature review to try to position what it is that you're finding against what we know in the field. And then we're going to do some analysis and some packaging, right? The three pieces actually on this that happen during the spring term are your research question, planning your data collection, which you and I will do individually. We'll have some meetings to talk about this. One of the outcomes of our course in disciplined inquiry this semester, once you're finished with your portfolio entries, will be to put together a pretty formal research plan that just helps you identify and think through what you need to do in order to complete this project. It's not a dissertation that you're writing about an 8 to 10 page paper, but it's a well-informed, well-situated 8 to 10 page paper, so that's something to think about. When it comes to thinking about teaching with this kind of research frame of mind, we don't always start out with really specific, clearly formulated questions, right? We typically begin by just noticing what's going on inside of our classrooms. We begin by inhabiting a space that says, what are the things that I really could pursue that are worth pursuing, right? I'll be honest, as a young teacher, teacher research was usually the furthest thing from my mind. It didn't come into my work until I was doing work in the National Writing Project, and until I did my master's in education work. I focused my first studies on looking at background talk inside of my classroom and in trying to figure out how students were using conversations as they worked in table groups that were relevant or beneficial to their learning, and what we could do with those opportunities where those conversations were moving off into some other directions that weren't so purposeful. But it took a while to get to that question. That question emerged for me out of attention. It certainly didn't emerge out of my wanting to celebrate something that I already had the answers to. And it didn't come out of me wanting to celebrate some best practice that I knew was shiny and good in my work. Instead, it was authentic. And part of that is because you're going to spend a lot of time working on this. You want it to be a question that matters to you. So in thinking about your research questions, here's some guidelines. And there's a handout that I'm sending today where I'm going to ask you to do some brainstorming, about 10 minutes worth of brainstorming that you're going to bring to class next week. And on that handout, you'll kind of be working through some prompts that I hope will jar your thinking and help you to start thinking a little bit about how to develop your initial research question. We're going to work on that a lot more inside the context of class. But these kinds of wonder questions that I'm talking about are questions that are real, right? Not confirming something that you already know, but that actually propel you to be reading and thinking about something that you're genuinely interested in. Can't go with a yes-no question. Your questions should be cast in the framework of what happens when, or how does something impact student learning, or what if, ... And inside of an exercise that I'm also going to share with you, I'm going to model for you the steps of how one of these questions might develop and how we get rid of some of the jargon and maybe even value-laden words and phrases inside of a question, because you want to be pretty exact about what you're looking at, but not so exact that someone who looks at your work wouldn't understand what you were doing unless they were teaching inside of your specific content area in your classroom, in your teaching context at this time. You need to have it a little bit more loose than that. So here's the next steps. Here's what I want you to be thinking about. The document that I talked about where I walk you through the steps of formulating a research question, give that a close read and really think about the evolution of the example question that I give you. I want you to also look at the second attachment, which has some open-ended questions that I want you to respond to. Please take at least 10 minutes. Might take 15, might take 20, might be something where you want to look at the sheet, let it sit for a day or two, and then respond to the prompts and the questions. Give it some time, some real time, and bring that to class next week completed. And read about, I'm going to attach a sheet about the paper's format and the rubric. Read about those things just so you're oriented in your head and you get a sense of what we're talking about. It's entirely possible that your work might come out of a question that emerges as you're working on one of your portfolio entries. That's fine. It's not double dipping. It might come out of something that you've studied in another class. It might come out of a method or a strategy that you've really been itching to utilize and to make happen and deploy in your classroom. This might be the excuse that you needed to do something a little bit risky that your cooperating teacher might not have been 100% behind. It's fine to say, I really need to do this research-based project in order to complete my degree requirements for my master's degree. You have a lot of openness and flexibility inside of this. Think about it, and we'll work next week on developing your research questions. We'll also work next week on entry number 3 and previewing entry number 4. Hopefully you're working on entry number 2 right now in your writing. And I look forward to seeing you next week. Please let me know if you have any questions as you're thinking about this work, and we'll take it from there.